Well, we can't start things out without a little coffee talk. Then, narrow front tractors, the increasing size of grain carts, and seed tanks. Then it's Transportation Week. North Dakota bringing out semi-road trains, autonomous trucks, and Platoon Trucking. This is the Rural Reflections Podcast. Welcome to the Rural Reflections Podcast. Dave Nelson's in Carrington, North Dakota. I'm Grant Nelson, his little brother, here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio. And Dave, good morning. And what a beautiful Sunday that we're doing this podcast on.
Boy, it's actually gone downhill here now, but this morning, that little slice of moon that was out there for the whole morning pretty much, but from about 6 o'clock on, and the sky was clear as could be. The sun came up so nice, and now it's cloudy, and it's kind of trying to snow a little bit.
Well, if that's what you have right now, we'll probably be getting it at about 3 o'clock this afternoon. It seems to be the way of it. And I agree. This morning when I woke up, I was sitting there getting ready to write my newspaper column, and I thought to myself, I need some inspiration. And I looked out the window, and I thought, okay, dummy, if you can't get inspiration from this scene, you probably can't get inspiration at all, because it was pretty nice around our place too. But right now, it's warmed up enough. So much to the point, I didn't even know if I needed a neck gaiter. I didn't have a stocking cap when I walked into the radio station this morning. That's how warm it is. I have a stocking cap on all the time.
Yeah, it was really a pretty morning.
Let's talk a little bit about commodity prices. They're on the way up. It seems like things are looking pretty good for farmers right now if they've got something in the bin, and quite a few of them do have something in the bin, Dave.
Yeah, it's a mixture of stories when I talk to people. Either they sold them for $7 or $8 or whatever, pre-sold, and either they're having to deliver them or they've already delivered them, or they've got a couple loads left that they want to hold back until they can hit the highest price that you can get for them. So it really looks good in the commodity world, and upcoming looks good yet too. So yeah, I hope we can have a year where the crop is good and it's sold based on demand and they get paid for it.
That'd be good. We get that first USDA report, I don't know, early summer, late spring, somewhere in there. It'd be nice to be excited for a good reason to see that once,
Yeah, I would like to see that too.
Well, this is part of our coffee talk format for the first half of the Rural Reflections Podcast. We can talk about whatever we want. So let's talk about Oddball Tractors. I sent you a picture the other day of a 1066 with the narrow front. And the first thing, I like the look of a narrow front. I'm not so sure about the utility of a narrow front, but the look of it is fantastic. But I thought to myself, why would anybody want a 1066 in a narrow front? I just can't imagine what the purpose of that would be. At the time it was made, it had been really too big for an auger tractor, and to have a narrow front for a puller, out in the field, I can't imagine that making sense either.
No, I don't. I wonder if it's not mostly for aesthetics, because the only benefit I ever recall out of the narrow front was the sharp turning, that you could get. Otherwise, I just think back to the M and the old age John Deeres that we used to drive around and stuff at the shop when I worked there. And there was nothing fun about trying to hang on to the steering wheel when you hit a bump with a narrow front.
That's for sure, especially if it had a good loose mechanism in the steering, so it got a little bit of speed before it finally connected with the gearing that was connected to the steering wheel, so it could really wrap your knuckles.
Yeah, boy, I got a lot of good knuckle wraps out of that.
I remember driving the M home, our dad's M, and I drove it, I suppose, 15 miles, and that had a pretty tall road gear. And I was driving home, and I remember it was just back and forth, back and forth. The best way to steer it was just to constantly move the steering wheel so you're always kind of meeting it in the middle, because any oversteer on that narrow front, I mean, you were headed for the ditch. I mean, you always felt a little bit closer to God when you were in road gear with the narrow front, because you never knew what was going to happen if you overcorrected.
No, I know. I remember sleeping hay with it and stuff, and if you hit a badger hole or a gopher hole or something, it was pretty much a guarantee it was going to whip that steering wheel out of your hand, and the steering knob would finish the job and bang in the knuckles.
And how about having the M with the loader bucket anywhere more than 4 or 5 feet in the air, especially when you got it up to, what did it go, 21 feet or so? Remember just like letting that down, and just, it was like you were playing with dynamite or something like that. You made sure you didn't touch the clutch or do anything like that, because you had to get that bucket down before you moved.
Yeah, I remember trying to top off the haystacks with that. And Dad is up on the haystack, and I'm up there trying to get that loader working at 21 feet and keep it from tipping over. And, you know, it was quite unnerving, and I got used to it, but I can still hear that, you know, the thing rocking back and forth and squeaking, and it wasn't good.
Yeah, because it had those pins. It had a pin for the brace, and it had a big pin where the whole thing mounted. And when those things creak back and forth, especially when you moved the bucket, there was a hydraulic cylinder within one of the frame posts. And if you were doing any of those things, there was some creaking going on. And I always remember thinking to myself, well, there's lots of room to jump if I have to. There's always plan B or C in case everything goes to heck.
Yeah, well, you needed to have a way out, that's for sure.
This is part of our Coffee Talk segment on the Rural Reflections podcast. We're going to save ourselves a little bit of time for part 2, because we're going to talk a lot about trucking, platoon trucking, the road train legislation that's going through in North Dakota, autonomous trucks, all that sort of thing coming up in just a little bit. Dave, let's take a break for my online column, and then we'll have more of the Rural Reflections podcast. This is Rural Reflections. I like to talk about my passions. One of these passions is a desire to fly. This desire, totally counterintuitive to the fact I'm intensely scared of heights. I've flown several times, and it's a safe form of transportation. However, I would rather enjoy the exhilaration of flight without the elevation of flight. I started building and flying model planes and rockets when I was young, as did my brother Daryl. The first few hundred feet of airspace were fairly busy north of Viking back in the 70s. Now, in the last few years, drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, have replaced model airplanes for me. They're now much easier to fly and have high-quality onboard cameras, which transfer the experience directly to the screen on a ground controller, which, of course, I carry. There was a time when drones were primarily recreational. They can still be used that way under the rules of radio-controlled aircraft. I've rarely derived pleasure from simple recreation, however. I would rather complete a task which require my operator skills for a UAV or a drone. Any operator who pilots an unmanned aerial vehicle for commercial reasons must have a license issued from the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. Now, the commercial use of UAVs right now is changing quickly. UAVs used for video now have very high-quality cameras which can be used for telling a story or even inspecting bridges, towers, whatever you have. This sort of use will not involve most listeners. However, some of the changes happening now will make a change in daily life. Eventually. See, the FAA recently issued a rule that UAVs must eventually use remote identification equipment. The ruling must first be posted for 60 days, after which manufacturers will have about 18 months to either incorporate the technology into production UAVs or retrofit current units. After that, UAV operators will have 30 months after the ruling to begin using remote ID. Part of this ruling means the FAA is creating a way to monitor drone use in a fully accurate, real-time different way. They're basically creating virtual highways in the air to be used by UAVs and their operators. Industry experts have said this ruling is a step towards allowing a UAV to fly beyond line of sight. The rules will also allow UAVs to fly at night and over people. This is where the average person becomes involved, as somewhere in your future, your pizza may arrive airmail. The new rules also began another level of professionalism in UAV operation. If we must meet higher standards and adhere to more structure within the industry, drone operators will be able to use that part of the sky any way we wish, if it falls within the rules. Instead of using more restrictive rules which keep all levels of operator skill in check, the rules will allow only a select group to fly. However, they will be able to use their skills in more ways, perhaps in a greater portion of the sky. A good example of this would be using a drone to inspect power lines or pipeline. See if you can fly beyond the line of sight, then you can station yourself at one site, then complete your work much more quickly, as opposed to constantly repositioning to see your UAV. In any event, things are changing, and the skies are going to get more interesting. I'm Grant Nelson. This is Rural Reflections. Welcome back to the Rural Reflections podcast. You know, trucking, transportation, movement of commodities has become an awful interesting thing. Amazon is building a 1 million square foot, 3-story distribution center down in Fargo. American Trucking Association 2 years ago said they had a driver shortage of 60,000 people in over-the-road truckloads, and a segment that has a total driver population of 550,000 to 600,000 is what that is sampled from. Also, Dave, it seems like everything has gotten bigger out in the field when we're handling commodities. Can you tell us a little bit about grain carts and some of the grain carriers on the air seeders and some of that, what size they're getting to be?
Well, it seems unbelievable to me, but there's quite a big movement now to get 1,000 bushels behind you when you're seeding, you know. And if you think about that, that's more than a average semi-load that you're pulling around behind your drill. And depending on what you're seeding, you know, you could probably seed for 2 days with that and never have to fill again. I wonder about filling it, how you get 1,000 bushels out the field to fill again, but maybe with that kind of capacity, you don't have to. Maybe just take it into the yard or something. But it's gotten to be really a big issue. We went up in size on feeding tools, you know, into the 90-foot area, and that's a little big for our area because uneven field sizes and we're in pothole areas and stuff like that. But they seem to have settled in at a 60 to 70 feet, and then to compensate for that, then you're going to carry around 1,000 bushels of seed behind you and make up a little time that way for not having to fill so often.
Well, I think a person can just start looking at the size of the field crossings and how long the culverts are that they put in there before they put the field crossings to tell that we're dealing with a lot bigger equipment. We're dealing with a demand for more commodities in a quicker delivered in a quicker manner. And I saw this just recently. Supporters of a bill that would allow extra long semis on North Dakota roadways say it addresses a growing need to move more cargo, given the increase in e-commerce and a shortage of truck drivers. And also, I spoke with Tim Carlson from Hart's Trucking. He said doubles were legal in North Dakota, but only a 24 or 28-foot second trailer. I asked him about the weight, too, if there would ever be a problem on the roads, and he felt axle weight, would probably stay the same. And he said disc brakes also might be helpful, as a big part of trucking is safely stopping. So we've got bigger units. Well, we've got big units running down the road already, but it sounds like possibly up to triples and maybe full-size trailers in triples, Dave. What do you think of that?
Well, it's going to take a bigger truck.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing some of the stuff that we see coming through here. We're kind of a main artery to get from Interstate 94 to Canada.
And that would be, Interstate would be Highway 200 goes through Carrington, right?
200 and 281.
Okay,
yeah.
yep.
And actually, it's Highway 281 and 52 that is the route to Canada.
Okay.
But anyway, it kind of angles across, so you're saving a few miles by not having to make square corners. Instead, you're driving diagonally across the state. And it's really got some big stuff that comes through here. And I'm sure, we see the double trailers. That's not too unusual anymore. The freight companies get to use them. But they're not huge trailers, Yeah. But it's going to be interesting. Our roundabout here is capable of a 205-foot long load. So if you can make it that long, I imagine somebody will.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been through that roundabout in Carrington, and I always think to myself, the center section's big enough to, you almost have a roadside rest or a playground. Obviously, too high a traffic area for any of them, but it's pretty good size. Now, this is going on in North Dakota, and they're talking about just your state roads. But they have asked Congress to look at 28 and 94, or I-29 and 94 for the triple trailer also.
Yeah, and I'm sure that would probably be the more likely, that they're on there.
We talked a while back about not only autonomous trucking, which would be the absence of most human input, although in some cases there'd be a human present and the autonomous truck just taking care of some of the more simple things to, hopefully extend out. Maybe it would extend out the amount of time a person could spend on the road, or I'm not sure exactly where it's going, or if it was just a lack of truckers, or maybe there's something else I'm not even seeing, but we've talked about that. But also in Minnesota, of course, last July, I think it was, Minnesota Department of Transportation introduced Platoon Trucking, where you have 3 different semis together, very close. The front semi controls steer or braking and acceleration, and the other 2 control only their own steering, and so it's a more of a minimal input for driver 2 and 3. So got a lot of different things going on in transportation right now, Dave.
Yes, and it's amazing, but everything used to go by train. Train was always a thing, and then we've sped up things so much that you can't wait for a train for a lot of things. And when I first started working, all our equipment came in on train. We used to go down to the depot yard and unload and unchain and unwire and unblock combines and tractors and everything off of the rail. And now it's very, very rare to see any of that stuff on rail. All that stuff is on truck. Our new trailer now is going to be 59 feet. And that has no place on country roads, that's for sure, because you can't make the turn into anybody's yard. But it's coming, and, it's to get more stuff on there and get an extra set of wheels underneath it so you can haul something heavier. And it's hard to say where it's going to end.
Well, transportation is going to be interesting in the near future there, Dave. Got anything else before we wrap up for today? Oh, you got a birthday?
I guess not.
You've got a birthday you're celebrating today.
Yeah, my granddaughter, Aria, she's 3 now.
Well, Grandpa Nelson, you have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you.
All right.
You too.
Thank you. There he is, my brother, Dave Nelson, out in Carrington, North Dakota. I'm Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio, and this is the Rural Reflections Podcast.